The Outer Chapters. Webbed toes. A person with webbed toes is someone who has grown a useless part of the body. Only frogs and other creatures that spend most of their lives swimming in water need to have webbed toes. Not only is it unnecessary for people to have webbed toes, it is actually a liability. Web-toed is therefore a term we use to refer to something superfluous, needless, and inappropriate. People who are said to be web-toed in their sight are dazzled by superfluous and useless designs. Those who are web-toed in hearing are enchanted by pleasing words and addicted to noise and senseless babble. Unable to appreciate silence, they feel uncomfortable once the auditory stimulation stops. Those who are web-toed in speech speak with forked tongues, mangling virtue and manipulating benevolence for personal gain. To acquire fame and fortune, or to get vengeance, they will whip up a storm of spite in the name of service toward an ideal. They tear apart inborn nature, giving in to greed, revenge, and hate. Those who are web-toed in a discourse try to win debates by using cross-examination, twisted logic, and paradoxes. They thread their thoughts through useless words and fabricated differences, thus keeping themselves from the path of truth and virtue. In contrast, those who embrace virtue are not web-toed in sight, hearing, speech, or action. Having never lost their connection to their inborn nature of goodness, they do not delight in the superfluous and the useless. They abide in the constancy of the natural world, and their measure of length is never too long or too short. In this natural constancy, things are not twisted by logic, straightened by force, rounded by molding, squared by cutting, joined by glue, or bound together by rope and twine. Grounded in their natural interdependency, things are round, square, straight, or curved because that's the way they are, not because they were forced to be so. In a world immersed in virtue, people live in contentment, not knowing what makes them content. Their lives are simple, uncomplaining, and unadorned. They don't need wits and guile to get around in the world because there is no place for scheming. They understand that expertise has nothing to do with benevolence and virtue. You can be an expert in a skill like carpentry, but you cannot be an expert in virtue. To claim to be an expert in virtue means that you are manipulating virtue to your use. Virtue that is manipulated is no longer virtue. Benevolence that is applied is no longer benevolence. True virtue and benevolence are inborn and cannot be improved upon or applied. People who look at others and not at themselves will see only what others have. As a result, they will seek to gratify themselves with what others have, but never see what they have. They will try to emulate the thoughts and actions of others, but never delight in their inborn nature. They will try to figure out what brings joy to others, but will never know how to bring joy into their own lives. Horses and people. Horses are meant to run free. Their hooves are made to endure frost, snow, grass, and sand. They shed their coats in summer to keep cool and build a thick coat in winter to keep warm. Although they may be kept inside palaces and fine stables, they really have no need for these types of lodging. Then along come the horse trainers who claim to breed horses for specific needs. So now we have racehorses, show horses, war horses, and carriage horses. If there were no desire for the pleasure of racing, there would be no racehorses. If there were no amusement in watching horses perform, there would be no show horses. If there were no need for war, there would be no war horses. If people lived simple lives, preferring to walk rather than be carried around in vehicles, there would be no need for carriage horses. In order to improve breeding and train horses for special uses, the horse trainers geld those of lesser breeding, starve and strangle them into submission, force them to run side by side and respond to bit and rein, and make them cower in terror of whip and bridle. By the time the horse trainers have obtained what they want, half the horses have not survived. If there were no demand for special horses, there would be no demand for trainers and breeders, and the horses would be left to their inborn nature. Handling the affairs of the state is like handling horses. Only those who desire to dominate would rule by fear and terror, whipping and starving citizens into submission. Only those who seek to conquer the world would train soldiers by subjecting them to routines that maim and injure the recruits. Only those who desire to control every behavior of their subjects would force their people to think and act the way they dictate. Only those who do not command respect naturally would force submission with the threat of punishment. The sagely ruler does nothing like this, but instead lets the people follow their inborn nature. weaving threads for clothing, farming land for food, and celebrating as a community when the occasion calls for it. This is called sharing virtue. When virtue pervades society, people's gait is slow and relaxed, and their gaze is soft and steady. Roads are not cut through mountains, rivers are not dammed, and forests are not cleared. Birds can nest near villages without fear of being hunted. Wild animals do not prey on domestic animals, and children do not need to run from strangers. Because people are simple and honest and do not know what it means to scheme, their thoughts and actions are not distorted by ambition and technical know-how. Free of desire, they abide in a simplicity that is uncarved and unadorned. In this way, they are never separated from their inborn and true nature. If virtue and the natural way of things were not abandoned, there would be no need for rules, regulations, or even the teaching of kindness and benevolence. If unborn nature were not ignored, there would be no need for rituals, rites, and ethics. If people were not trapped by sensual pleasures, there would be no place for fads and fashions. People abandoned the way because they thought they could improve on something that is actually best left alone. The natural ways were abandoned when the artisan decided that human activity could outdo natural beauty. They were abandoned when rulers believed that laws and justice could replace virtue. When horses are left alone to roam the fields, they eat the grass and drink from the streams. In mating season, they procreate. In natural affection, they rub their necks against each other. In competing for a mate, they kick and scream. This is what horses naturally do. Force them to race or pull heavy loads, and they will rip the hitches, injure the handlers, or topple the carriage. If horses can resort to destructive behavior when forced to do what is not their inborn nature, imagine what people will do when they are forced to go against their inborn nature. The sagely rulers ruled by not ruling. People stayed at home when they needed to be at home and traveled only when they needed to go somewhere. They farmed, wove, cooked, and traded as they felt the need. Their mouths were full and they were happy. Patting their bellies, they passed their time in contentment. Then along came those who wanted to motivate people to do more, have more, and want more. People learned to covet knowledge and know-how. They fought over profit and loss. They schemed to be more prosperous, more famous, and more powerful than those around them. Once these changes occurred, it became difficult to return to the inborn nature of simplicity. Rifling through boxes. Someone who plans to guard against thieves who rifle through boxes will put locks on the containers. Believing that the goods are secure, the person will proceed to pile more treasures into the locked chests. Locks may deter the petty thief, but a smart thief will simply haul away the boxes and break the locks later. If you don't put locks on boxes, then you are bound to put fewer possessions in them, and when you're robbed, you'll lose less. If you lock the boxes, however, you'll have a false sense of security. As a result, you will put more treasures in the boxes and end up losing more. So piling up possessions just means that you'll invite smarter thieves. Similarly, piling up laws and regulations means that you'll encourage more ingenious ways of breaking them. If you don't want thieves rifling through your boxes, then cultivate simplicity. With simplicity, what is stored will not be perceived as treasures. When there is no perceived value in the contents of the boxes, thieves will not be interested in stealing what's in there. Just as fish should not be taken out of deep pools, weapons should not be shown publicly. Fish thrive in deep water, and sages thrive in anonymity. When sages seek publicity and try to distinguish themselves, they are no longer sages. They begin to see the practice of virtue as a profession rather than a state of being. In this way, they are no different from the criminal who sees crime as a normal career. The sage is like a sharp weapon. This weapon should never be displayed and should be used only out of necessity. It is better if the sage never gets to use his wisdom. It is said that when there is no desire for war, there will be no need for a military presence. Even peacekeeping forces will be out of work. Set up a system of weights and measures, and people will figure out ways to cheat it. Promote ethics, and people will exhibit benevolent actions but have criminal thoughts. Put a value on gold, jade, and jewelry, and thieves will multiply. Reward ambitious behaviors and intentions, and people will resort to unscrupulous ways to obtain favors. The world has gone awry because people in positions of leadership abandon their responsibilities once they have attained wealth and reputation. They pack up their belongings and dash off to exotic places. They abandon their families, serve causes that give them the most profit, and do not hesitate to betray their home country for favors abroad. This happens when people forsake the way and follow personal ambition. When ambition becomes the root of knowledge, knowledge and technology will develop to serve control and conquest. When knowledge is developed for making bows and arrows, birds will flee to the skies. When knowledge is used to make dragnets, fish will disappear into the ocean depths. When knowledge is used to make traps and snares, wild animals will hide in the forests and mountains. When knowledge is used to fashion weapons of destruction, sages will live in oblivion. When the way is abandoned, confusion will reign. Confusion is so destructive that it can block the brightness of the sun and the moon, scorch fields and hills, dry up rivers and lakes, and overturn the cycles of the seasons. It can push aside honest and simple people in favor of those who are ambitious and ruthless. It can draw people away from calm non-action and drive them into a frenzy of jumbled and endless chattering. If you can get people to turn their senses away from external things, they will be able to look inward. Looking inward, they will regain true sight. When people have true sight, the world will no longer look dazzling. If the world is no longer perceived as glamorous, people will no longer desire to be stimulated by sights and sounds every moment of their waking lives. Consequently, they can begin to cultivate a silent appreciation of their surroundings. When people hold on to their inborn wisdom, the world will no longer appear confused. When people do not lose their connection to virtue, the world will no longer feel crazy. Leave it alone. Let the world be. Leave it alone. Don't try to manipulate and control it. Otherwise, you will abandon the way and distract people from virtue. If the natural order of things is not disrupted, if people don't stray from virtue, there will be no need for laws and administration. If you are excessively happy, you will damage the yang within. If you are excessively angry, you will damage the yin within. When yin and yang are damaged, the seasons will become untimely, and the world will become unsettling and confusing. Heat and cold will be out of harmony, people will be restless, and illness will increase. Unable to balance happiness and anger, people will move impatiently from place to place, think up schemes that lead to nothing, and argue with no conclusions. Although everyone seems to agree that virtuous people should be rewarded, there appears to never be enough reward. Although everyone seems to agree that unethical people should be punished, there appears to never be enough punishment. Ever since there has been government and large bureaucracy, people have fussed over rewards and punishments, debating over how they should be given and in what amount. Constantly arguing for the sake of arguing, how can people ever have time to rest in the inborn nature of virtue? Become attached to what you see, and you'll be blinded by shapes and colors. Become attached to what you hear, and you'll be deafened by the roar of sounds. Become attached to benevolence, and you'll bring confusion to virtue. Become attached to etiquette, and you'll be trapped in artificiality. Become attached to correctness, and you'll abandon compassion. Become attached to knowledge, and you'll encourage petty fault-finders. Become attached to being a sage, and you'll end up abandoning the way. As long as you rest in the inborn nature, it does not matter whether there are sights, sounds, benevolence, rites, rituals, knowledge, and wisdom. If you do not rest in the inborn nature, these things will get warped and be blown out of proportion. There's nothing wrong with delighting in sights, sounds, benevolence, etiquette, music, propriety, knowledge, and becoming a sage. It becomes a problem only when we become attached to them. Enjoy the delight by resting in these things rather than wanting to have them. Once you promote, reward, cherish, and value them, you'll be on the road to delusion. It was said that after the Yellow Emperor ruled for 19 years, his commands were followed and respected by all his subjects. Believing that he could still improve his leadership skills, he went to the sage Guangzhen for advice. The emperor bowed before the sage and said, "I would like to learn about the essence of heaven and earth so that I can apply it to help the grains to grow. I want to master yin and yang so that I can use it to nourish the earth and my people. Can you teach me?" Guangzhen replied, "It looks like you want to learn about the natural order of things in order to control them. When you control the natural order is no longer natural. How can something that is not natural give birth to and nourish all things? You've turned government into control and benevolence into mere behavior. Ever since you ascended the throne, rain has fallen before the clouds gathered, leaves have fallen before they turned yellow, and the light of the sun and the moon have grown weaker every day. This is all because of your wanting to control everything. You stupid and arrogant man, how can you be taught the way?" The Yellow Emperor returned home and spent 3 months living in a straw hut in solitary retreat. Then he humbly went to Guangzhen again for advice. This time he crawled on his hands and knees to where the sage was meditating and said, "Please teach me how to live a long and healthy life." Guangzhen opened his eyes, saw the Yellow Emperor's sincerity, and said, "You are now ready to learn. The way is fathomless, hidden, dark, and silent. When there is no seeing and no hearing, the body will regulate itself. Be still in thoughts, do not tire your body with labor, do not churn up your desire, and you will live a long life. When the eye does not see, when the ears no longer hear, and when the mind no longer wants to know, the spirit will embrace and protect the body, and the body will enjoy health and longevity. Don't get carried away by what is inside. Block off what is intruding from the outside. Too much knowledge will harm the spirit. Too much physical labor will harm the body. Too much indulgence will harm the essence of life. Once you understand this, I will show you the path through the great luminosity to the source of pure yang, and guide you through the dark mysterious gate to the source of pure yin. Heaven and earth have their masters, and yin and yang have their storehouses. Take care of your own body. Guard it from things that can harm it. Then the sky and earth, the yin and yang within you, will grow strong." The Yellow Emperor prostrated, thanked Guangzhen, and asked, "What is the source and the great harmony?" Guangzhen replied, "They are inexhaustible, yet people think that they have a beginning and an end. They are unfathomable, yet people think they can be measured. Those who embody them within will be luminous. Above they will merge with vastness. Below they will rule and protect the earth. Those who fail to embody them will remain trapped in the muck of confusion. Now that I have given you pointers to the way, it's up to you to enter the gate of the inexhaustible, wander freely in the limitless, merge with the sun and the moon, and rest with the constancy of heaven and earth. What is before me I embrace. What is beyond me I let merge with darkness." Rest in non-action and stillness, and things will transform by themselves. Don't be preoccupied with form, do not be attached to the senses, and forget that you are a thing among other things. Then you'll be able to join with the deep and fathomless. Untangle the mental knots, cast off thoughts, be blank and unresponsive, and you will return to the root of all things without knowing how and why. Tumbling within the dark and undifferentiated chaos, you'll never be separated from the origin. But if you try to analyze it, you will already have separated yourself from it. Don't ask its name, don't try to figure out its form. Simply leave it alone and let it be. The teachings of the sagely ruler is like a shadow. Although it follows principles, it has no form. Although it can be heard, it is like an echo that simply mirrors a sound. The sage answers only when there are questions. Then she pours out her thoughts and makes herself a friend to all. She lives in the void, moves without direction, and takes you by the hand to lead you to return to the source. Wandering freely in that which has no beginning and no end, she weaves in and out of the limitless. Ageless as the sun, she blends with the great unity. Selfless, she is not bound to anything. Not being bound to anything, how can she have possessions? Being limitless, how can she be trapped by things meaningful and meaningless? Those who fix their attention on possessions were called sensible in ancient times, but those who turn their awareness on nothingness are the true friends of heaven and earth. Even the lowliest things have their use. Even the most mundane people can be given responsibilities. Even the most annoying affairs must be attended to. Even though laws have loopholes, they must still be enforced. Even though integrity is necessary to form distant relationships, it must be practiced. Even though benevolence may affect only those near you, the extent of its influence cannot be doubted. Even though rituals can be tedious sometimes, they must be practiced repeatedly. Even though virtue cannot be separated from humanity, it must be embraced tirelessly. Even though the way is part of the natural order, it still has to be adapted to circumstances. Even though the way of heaven is inherently spiritual, it still has to be put into action. The sage contemplates heaven but does not help it along. He contemplates virtue but does not need to embellish it. He acts in accordance to the way but does not plan to do it deliberately. He exercises benevolence but does not brag about it. He draws inspiration from integrity but does not need to force it to happen. He participates in rituals but does not shun or wallow in them. He does not make excuses when he needs to get rid of things. The sage adopts laws and regulations to avoid confusion. She asks people to assist her without being totally dependent on them or dismissive of their contributions. She knows tools are useful under certain circumstances, but does not discount them or become attached to them when the task is completed. She does not believe that things are either useful or useless, because she knows that use and non-use change according to circumstances. Those who do not understand the way will not be pure in virtue. Consequently, they will not be able to find an appropriate path in life. This is pitiful indeed. The way is that which is natural. It is the path of the immortals. There is also the mundane and petty way, which is not the way. To rest in non-action and command respect is the natural way. To use force in action and become entrapped in it is the mundane and petty way. The path to immortality is about becoming simpler and simpler each day. The path of pettiness is about increasing complexity day after day. Heaven and earth. Heaven and earth are both primal, but they manifest themselves differently. Although there are myriad things, they come from the same source. Although there are numerous citizens in a kingdom, they are all subjects of the same sovereign. The sovereign finds meaning in ruling by connecting to virtue and the way. The sagely sovereigns of ancient times ruled through non-action, doing nothing more than being grounded in virtue. If the light of the way illuminates the world, the sovereign will be virtuous. If the light of the way illuminates the relationship of the ruler and the ruled, the duties of the sovereign and the ministers will be clear. If the light of the way illuminates the abilities of the ministers, the affairs of the country will be organized. If the light of the way illuminates everywhere, the creation and nourishment of the 10,000 things will be complete. The way pervades heaven and earth. Virtue flows through all the myriad things. When there is natural order between those who rule and those who serve, we call this good administration. When abilities are trained and used appropriately, we call this good skill. Good skill is a part of good administration. Good administration comes from dedication. Dedication is rooted in virtue, and virtue is tied to the way. In ancient times, the sagely rulers followed the way of virtue. When virtue was followed, the people were content and satisfied. When the people are content, the nation will be peaceful. When nations are peaceful, there will be no wars abroad and no violence at home. Heaven is so vast that it encompasses the 10,000 things. Earth is so great that it can support them. To follow the ways of heaven and earth is to act through non-action. To embody virtue is to speak through non-action. To care for all beings by bringing benefits to all is called benevolence. To be able to go beyond barriers and fixedness is called freedom. To possess the 10,000 things and not be possessed by them is called wealth. To embrace virtue and not budge from it is called being rooted in the origin. To grow into virtue is called maturity. To follow the way is called fruition. Not allowing external stimulation to disrupt your stillness is called perfection. Hide your gold in the mountains. Bury your jewels in the ocean depths. When you see no gain in accumulating and displaying money and goods, when you are not excited by wealth and status, when you are not particularly happy about long life or sad about early death, when social recognition no longer attracts you, when you find no shame in poverty and no aversion toward wealth, you won't be interested in robbing others to build your hoard or flaunting your wealth to gain power and win admiration. Those who possess virtue embrace simplicity and do not wish to be a master of facts and details. Standing on the ground of the origin, their understanding reaches not only people but also ghosts and spirits. Because their virtue reaches far, their thoughts emerge only when necessary. Without the origin, bodies cannot have life. Without virtue, life cannot have clarity. To preserve the body and live a long and healthy life, to uphold virtue and make clear the way, this is virtue. Vast, boundless, suddenly emerging, suddenly dissolving, moving this way and that, inspiring the 10,000 things without fanfare, such are those who embody virtue. Those who embody virtue can see in complete darkness and hear in complete silence. In the midst of darkness, they alone see the light of dawn. In the midst of silence, they alone hear harmony. Hiding in the shadowy depths, tangled among layers of spirituality, they alone discover the true inner essence. In the primal beginning there was the void. The void has no name or substance. Out of the void emerged the one that has no form. When the one awoke and came to life, it was called virtue. The one transformed and became two. From the flow and flux of the two, things came into being, each taking on its distinctive form, though still connected to the one. Within each form is inborn nature. Form has limitations and characteristics, but inborn nature does not. Inborn nature is inseparable from virtue, and virtue, in its highest manifestation, is identical to the primal beginning. Cultivate virtue, and you will be no different from the primal beginning. Being no different from the primal beginning, you will be empty. Being empty, you will be clear. Being clear, you will be pure. Being pure, you will be great. Being great, you will be able to merge with heaven and earth. This joining of heaven and earth is wild and spontaneous. It is free from the dualities of rudeness and courtesy, stupidity and ingenuity, and it will send you deep into the swirling chaos of primal virtue. When a great sage rules, he creates conditions to allow people's minds to be vast, free, and far-wandering. He simplifies custom, etiquette, and sophistication, and allows people to act according to their inborn nature. Thus he removes meaning from treason and rebellion. Those who embrace the way are complete in virtue. If you are complete in virtue, you'll be complete in body. Being complete in body, you'll be complete in spirit. And being complete in spirit is the mark of the sage. When you are content to live in simplicity, then achievement, profit, fame, and fortune will have no place in your life. When praised, you won't be concerned. When blamed, you'll be serene and calm. Letting body and spirit follow the inborn nature, you can wander freely through the everyday world and not be flustered. Completely hidden in the midst of society, your external appearance will be like any other person's, but internally you will be merged with the primal simplicity and returned to true luminosity and purity. When a sage governs, she assigns duties so that the abilities of the ministers fit the tasks. She promotes them so that no talent goes to waste. She knows the skills of her subjects and puts them where they are best for the country. She has no time for flatterers or the incompetent. It is not that she is not compassionate. It is because she knows that incompetence will harm the people and flattery will get nothing done. The government of the sage has no need for edicts, commands, threats, or enticements. With only a simple nod or a wave of her hand, people will come flocking to assist her. Those who embody virtue have no bias toward beauty and against ugliness. They see situations beyond right and wrong. They share happiness with those who are joyful, sadness with those who suffer, bewilderment with those who have lost their way, and amusement with those who are fascinated with a new discovery. Such is the person who has embraced virtue. Those who cultivate the essence of life are able to eject the spirit to ride the light when the body dissolves. The light is the radiance that illuminates vastness. These people live out their lives following their inborn nature. In life, they rest in the joyful flux of heaven and earth. In death, they merge with the dark and undifferentiated chaos and return to the oblivion from which they originally came. When virtue rules, the virtuous are not employed and the talented are not sought after. Everyone does what is appropriate without knowing the principles of right and wrong. They care for one another but have no idea that this is called benevolence. They are true to the inborn nature but have no concept of loyalty. They are trustworthy but do not know the meaning of honesty. They perform all kinds of services for one another but do not know that this is being kind. In this way they move through their lives without leaving tracks and footprints. Acting naturally, they arrive without fanfare and depart without leaving a trace. When virtue is abandoned, people agree with what is popular and do things to please the crowd. Public opinion, not inborn nature, and not even the conviction of right and wrong, dictates beliefs and actions. Leaders polish arguments and speak pleasing words to gain support. Followers are enticed by petty promises and gains. Those in government display their skills in the hope of attaining wealth and advancement. Abandoning the principles of right and wrong, they brag about their leadership skills while belittling others. Yet all this time they have failed to see themselves as one of the mob. Those who know that they are fools are not the biggest fools. Those who know that they are confused are not as confused as they think they are. The most confused are those who live their entire lives not knowing the straight from the crooked. The biggest fools are those who in all their lives have never seen the light of virtue and have never even aspired to see that light. When colors and shapes confuse the eyes, the eyesight will be unclear. When noise and dissonance confuse the ears, the hearing will be dulled. When odors overstimulate the nose, headaches will occur. When flavors inundate the mouth, the sense of taste will be impaired. When likes and dislikes dominate thoughts, people will be volatile and unable to hold on to their inborn nature. Thus, overloading your senses and crowding your mind with too many opinions can be a dangerous thing. The ways of heaven. It is natural for heaven to keep moving and not be fixed. In this way, the myriad things can come to fruition. It is natural for a ruler to keep moving and not be fixed. In this way, the world can be made whole. It is natural for the sage to keep moving and not be fixed. In this way, humanity can aspire to be like him. To understand the ways of heaven, to be a friend of wisdom, to walk the path of virtue, and to dwell in stillness dreamily, all come naturally to the sage. The sage does not abide in stillness because she believes that stillness is good and desirable. Rather, it is because it is the natural thing to do. Just as a pool of still water gives a clear image of everything reflected in it, the stillness that the sage abides in is the perfect mirror of heaven and earth and the 10,000 things. Emptiness, simplicity, silence, and stillness are the natural tendencies of heaven and earth. Rest in emptiness, and you will be full and complete. Rest in stillness, and you will accomplish without action. Rest in simplicity, and you will be joyful, and when you take joy in simplicity, you will be free from anxiety over gain and loss. Rest in silence, and you will preserve the spirit and live a long and healthy life. Emptiness, simplicity, silence, and stillness form the root of the 10,000 things. To be able to embody them is the mark of an enlightened ruler. To be able to apply them is the mark of an enlightened minister. To be able to hide them is the mark of the dark sage, the shadow advisor. To rest in them is to lead a life of free and aimless wandering. To embrace them is to be at one with the rivers and the seas, the hills and the forests. To emerge with them is to engage the world. To act in them is to rule a harmonious and peaceful society. Rest in stillness and you will be a sage. Rest in action and you will be a ruler. Rest in silence and you will be honored. Rest in simplicity and no one will compete with you. Those who have a clear view of virtue and the ways of heaven and earth are called the great ancestors. They are in harmony with the ways of heaven, and being in harmony with heaven, they bring harmony to humanity. To harmonize with fellow beings is called human joy. To harmonize with the ways of heaven is called celestial joy. In passing judgment, the sage does not consider himself severe. In extending his bounty to all, he does not consider himself altruistic. Older than the oldest, he does not think he is long-lived. Above, he covers heaven, and below, he supports the earth. He creates and destroys the 10,000 forms, but does not consider himself skilled. Dwelling in the joy of heaven, he knows that life is simply the workings of heaven, and that death is part of the natural transformation of things. In stillness, he partakes in the yin. In motion, he flows with the yang. Those who dwell in the joy of heaven incur no wrath from heaven, no opposition from humanity, no entanglement from things, and no harm from ghosts and spirits. In movement, they embody the ways of heaven. In stillness, they embrace the ways of earth. The sage experiences heavenly joy whether she leads the world in motion or rests in stillness. The virtues of a sagely ruler are rooted in heaven and earth. Since heaven and earth naturally tend to be still, the sagely ruler, abiding in this stillness, can lead the world with time to spare. The superior ruler applies non-action, and the world follows her naturally. The inferior ruler forces things along, and the world drags after her unnaturally. The enlightened ruler possesses knowledge and wisdom as great as heaven and earth, but that wisdom is never forced. Although her understanding surpasses that of the greatest thinkers, she does not expound theories. Although her abilities outshine all, she does not attempt to make things happen. Knowing that heaven gives birth and that earth bestows nourishment without making an effort, she rests with the source and lets her subordinates deal with the trivial. The essence of ruling lies in the ruler. The details of running a kingdom lie with the ministers. The ruler rules according to the principles of virtue. The ministers work in the details of virtue. Giving rewards and punishments and calculating benefits and penalties are the details of public administration. Rituals and laws, weights and measures, and management of public servants are the details of efficient government. Setting standards for fabricating musical instruments and training musicians are the details of making music. Setting guidelines for mourning, funeral rites, and burials are the details of the protocol of grieving. However, while ministers need to be diligent in attending to the details of virtue, they must also be inspired by the movement of the spirit in the leader. Without spirit, details become mindless trivia and forms become empty functions. The ruler leads, the ministers follow. The parents provide, the children benefit. The sage teaches, the people are inspired. What is above is honored and what is below is commanded. These are the workings of heaven and the natural way of things. Heaven is above, earth is below. Spring precedes summer, summer is followed by autumn, and autumn is followed by winter. This is the natural sequence of the seasons. The transformations of birth, growth, death, and decay are part of the natural order of things. The sagely ruler understands the way and is intimate with the workings of heaven. Being intimate with the ways of heaven, he embodies virtue naturally. Embodying virtue, he can apply its details. Having clarity in the details of virtue, he can do his duties without bias. Knowing how to apply virtue, he is able to assign responsibilities according to the abilities of his subordinates. Having assigned responsibilities, he can observe the performance of his subordinates and give rewards and punishments. In this way, good and competent people will be used to the best of their abilities. Those with a deep understanding of virtue are put in leadership positions. Those with a lesser understanding of virtue are placed in adjutant positions. Without scheming and plotting, everyone and everything will find its right place under heaven. This is called the Great Peace, the highest form of governance. To give rewards and punishments without understanding the ways of heaven is like counting coins without understanding the value of money. To give a discourse on forms without understanding the ways of heaven is to be disconnected from the source. To impose law and order without understanding the ways of heaven can only bring about a temporary and uneasy peace. To be familiar with the methods of bringing order, but not understand the ways of heaven, allows you to work for the world, but does not get the world to work for you. Heaven and earth follow a constant. The sun and the moon have their natural brightness. Stars and planets have their locations in the sky. Birds and beasts relate to their own kind. Trees and grass grow only where the climate is appropriate for them. If you go along with virtue, you will naturally walk the path of the way. The way is not intimidated by the high and mighty. It is not demeaning toward the low and tiny. Myriad things are created and nourished by it. Vast, subtle, and simple, it receives and accommodates everything. Deep and profound, it cannot be fathomed. Rules, regulations, rites, rituals, rewards, and punishments are all subsumed under the way. Although they are trivial to the spirit, the enlightened ruler knows their value and puts them in the rightful place in governance. The sagely ruler cranks the handle that turns the world, but does not manage the workings. She sees through falsehood, but is not distracted by thoughts of gain and loss. She identifies truth in the midst of confusion, but does not cling to it. Putting aside life and death, even heaven and earth, she is not preoccupied with the myriad things. Being free from the 10,000 concerns, her spirit will never be weakened. The turning of the heavens. Do the heavens turn? Do the stars march through the sky? Is the earth still? Do the sun and the moon compete in their brightness? Who is in charge of all this? Who makes these things happen? Is there some kind of mechanism that runs ceaselessly, never allowing things to stop? Do clouds make rain, or does the rain make the clouds? The winds come from the north, now blowing east, now west, whirling high above the clouds. Are they somebody's breath? Who is huffing and puffing, making the winds whistle and the clouds move across the sky? The wise ones tell us that heaven and earth follow their own nature. No one can make them do things that are unnatural to them. When sovereigns and leaders follow the natural turning of heaven, there will be peace and order. When they move against the turning of heaven, there will be disasters and social disorder. When a ruler shines like a mirror reflecting the natural ways, the world will support him and beckon to his call. The most exalted are usually not interested in titles and renown. The most wealthy are usually not interested in riches. Those with the loftiest ideals are usually not interested in fame and reputation. The way, like water, follows the lowest gradient. It naturally winds its way toward the bottom, seeping through hidden cracks and crevices, to disappear into oblivion. Fame is a dreaded weapon. Don't reach for it too often. Benevolence is like the home of the rich and powerful. Don't stay for more than a night. The sage uses benevolence as a borrowed tool and employs integrity as a temporary shelter. Never tied to one place, she wanders in the lush forests as well as in the wastelands. She eats a simple meal in the fields of farmers and strolls in undecorated gardens. Free and easy, she rests in non-action. Plain and simple, she finds life easy and fulfilling. Undecorated and dull, she does not have any wisdom to be displayed. Those who believe in wealth will find it hard to give up their earnings. Those who value renown and recognition will find it hard to stay away from fame. Those who are attracted to power will hang on to leadership and never be able to hand the kingdom over to successors. Such people will not stop to reflect, let alone look at anything without wanting it. Clinging to the dichotomies of resentment and kindness, acceptance and rejection, giving and taking, punishing and being punished, and life and death, they shiver with fear, unable to accept the turning of events and the changing of fortunes. If you want to rest in simplicity, you must learn to move with the freedom of the wind and stand in the perfection of virtue. If you can't accept your place in the process of change, how can you expect to rule the world? It was said that when the Yellow Emperor performed his music, his guest, a minister, said, "When I first heard the music, I was afraid. Then hearing more, I felt weary of the world. By the end, I felt utterly confused and overwhelmed." The Yellow Emperor replied, "I am not surprised you felt that way. First, I performed the music through the eyes of humanity. Next, I tuned into the movement of heaven. Finally, I planted it in the great clarity. Perfect music must first empathize with humanity and be rooted in virtue. Then it must be tempered by the march of heaven. Finally, it must blend with clarity and spontaneity. Only then can the seasons turn in a timely manner. Only then can the 10,000 things have a chance to grow. Soaring, sinking, flourishing, decaying, all are in harmony with the natural order. In this music, the clear notes blend with the dull, the rhythm of yin merges with that of yang, the sounds flow in tendrils like light, and silence hibernates like insects ready to wriggle again in spring. At the end there is no tail, in the beginning there is no head. Now emerging, now dissolving, always transforming, yet it is also unchanging in its constancy. This is what scared you. Then I played harmony with yin and yang," he continued, illuminating the sound with the light of the sun and the moon. I made the notes long or short, soft or strong, modulating or in unison, yet never constrained by rules and form. In a valley they filled the valley. In the void they filled the void. They flowed into the crevices, held the spirit in the center, and accepted all things in their own terms. The tones were clear and radiant, the mood bright and clear. Ghosts and spirits were kept in their places. The sun, the moon, and the stars moved through their orbits. When the sound stopped, there was no end. When it started, there was no beginning. You were shown the emptiness of the way, and you knew you could not describe its vastness. Your body and mind melted with the emptiness, and you were plunged into total freedom. It was this freedom that made you weary of the world. Finally, the Yellow Emperor concluded, I tuned the music to spontaneity. Out of the chaos sprang forms. Forms returned to the formless, disappearing into obscurity where there was no sound. The notes moved in no direction and rested in mysterious shadows. Sometimes the music, fell like death. Sometimes it emerged like life. Sometimes it manifested as a flower, sometimes a fruit. Flowing, merging, disintegrating, it bowed to no one. You wanted to pin it down, but you had no way to grasp it. Music begins by evoking a fear of the unknown. The fear leads to dread. When I wove together dread and weariness, there was acceptance. When there is acceptance, I can end it by evoking confusion. With confusion, you are rattled to the core. When you are rattled, you will begin to feel stupid and simple. At this point, you will be ready to be carried along the way. This is the music of the turning of the heavens. Constraining freedom. To be highbrow in everything you do, to be aloof from the everyday world, to shun its customs, to be sophisticated in discourse, and to be critical and snide. This is the lifestyle favored by those who want to live in isolation. To condemn the world and its mundaneness, to feel wearied by the world, to be utterly despaired by what is happening around them, this is the mentality of those who want to end it all by plunging into the deep river. To preach benevolence, dedication, loyalty, and honesty, to have a sense of correctness in rites and rituals, to be moderate, modest, and polite. This is the lifestyle favored by those who want to educate the masses. To talk about great achievements, to win fame and renown, to set down the rules and regulations of correct etiquette, to appoint people to positions and define their responsibilities, to ensure that the affairs of the state are running smoothly, to expand the territory of the nation by peaceful coexistence or conquest. This is the lifestyle favored by those who serve their country. To mend fences and clean ponds, to fish idly by the river, and to rest in non-action. This is the lifestyle of the hermit scholar who is uninterested in social and political engagements. To puff and expel the old breath and inhale the new, to imitate the postures of the bear and the bird, to be concerned only with cultivating the energy of life. This is the lifestyle of those who aspired to be like Peng Zhu, who was said to have lived 800 years. All these lifestyles constrain freedom by encouraging a tendency toward certain things and the avoidance of others. Limiting your options by constraining freedom or encouraging options by promoting freedom are just two sides of the same coin. Both are lifestyles that accept certain actions and reject others. However, to have a vast view without constraining freedom, to be virtuous without having to be trained to be benevolent and loyal, to bring order to society without wanting fame and renown, to wander leisurely in the universe without being confined to the mountains and seas, to have a long life without exerting effort to attain it, to be comfortable with losing everything yet possessing everything, and to rest in the luminosity where all good things begin and end. This is what it means to follow the ways of heaven and earth, and rest in the virtue of the sage. Emptiness, stillness, clarity, simplicity, and non-action are the pillars of heaven and earth and the foundation of virtue. The sage rests in heaven, on earth, and in virtue. With rest there is peace. With peace there is non-action. In non-action, worry and concern cannot touch him. In peace, the poisons of the world cannot harm him. Because his virtue is complete, his spirit is not confused. In life, the sage follows the ways of heaven and earth. In death, she dissolves and merges with all things. In stillness, she is at one with the virtue of yin. In movement, she flows with the action of yang. She does not bring fortune or cause misfortune. She responds only when circumstances call for it. She acts only when it is necessary. She rises to the occasion only when there is no other alternative. Throwing away the whys and wherefores, she journeys through the ways of heaven, earth, and virtue. Because the sage is at one with heaven, earth, and virtue, he never meets with disaster, nor is he burdened by material things. He is not slandered by people or bothered by spirits. He floats with life and rests with death. He neither worries nor schemes. Like a light that does not dazzle, he is kind to everyone and everything. Completely trustworthy, he does not need to make promises. His sleep is dreamless, and his waking hours are free from worry. His spirit is pure, and his soul is not tired. In emptiness, nothingness, and simplicity, he is in harmony with the natural order of heaven and earth. Grief and elation pervert virtue. Fear and anger obstruct the way, and attraction and repulsion work against virtue. When you are without worry or expectation, virtue is complete. When there is oneness and constancy, stillness is complete. When there is no opposition to anything, emptiness is complete. When there is no resentment, purity is complete. If the body works too hard and does not rest, it will weaken. If generative energy is used without restraint, it will be exhausted. If energy is depleted, you will feel tired. It is the nature of water to be clear if it is not mixed with dirt. If water is not stirred, it will remain still. Dam it, and it will not flow. If it stops flowing, it will no longer be clear. Such is the nature of the ways of heaven and earth. If you remain pure and simple, you will not be confused. To be still clear and non-intrusive, to move along the celestial path of the sun, the moon, and the stars, this is the essence of cultivating the spirit. The spirit extends to the four directions. Above, it touches the sky. Below, it embraces the earth. It transforms and nourishes all things, but its form cannot be grasped. The way to colorless purity and clarity is to not let them wander away. When you are never separate from the spirit, you are at one with its essence. The common person values gain, the person of integrity values reputation, and the person with ability values motivation and aspirations. The sage, however, values the spirit. Colorless means white, and whiteness means there is nothing mixed in. When there is nothing mixed in, we say it is pure. When spirit is pure, it is not confused. Those who embody purity and transparency are called true beings. Trying to repair inborn nature. Those who hope to attain clarity and return to the source by trying to repair or enhance inborn nature through petty knowledge, and those who give excuses for desires, are deluded and blind. The wise ones who followed the way used tranquility and equanimity to cultivate true knowledge. They abided in this knowledge and did nothing. They knew that true knowledge and stillness enhanced each other. As a result, harmony and order naturally emerged from their inborn nature. Virtue is harmony, the way is order. When virtue is not separated from action, there is benevolence without pretense. When the way is followed, there is honor and integrity. When honor and integrity are understood, there is loyalty. When there is purity within, the primal order is appreciated. When there is trust in thought and action, elegance is the norm. When respect is part of everyday life, rites and rituals emerge naturally. The sages of old lived in the midst of the mundane and the chaotic. Existing with the rest of the world, they embraced simplicity and rested in silence. During those times, yin and yang were harmonious. Ghosts and spirits did not wreak havoc, the seasons changed naturally, water, rocks, and trees were not harmed, and living beings did not die premature deaths. The wise ones had knowledge but did not use it. They had wisdom but did not force things along. As a result, all things came and went spontaneously, according to their own nature. When it was time for them to emerge, they were born without fanfare. When it was time for them to die, they dissolved without struggling. When the way of virtue began to decline, people thought they needed to repair inborn nature. As a result, all kinds of plans to repair virtue emerged. Purity and simplicity were destroyed, and virtue became synonymous with conduct, protocol, and good behavior. People no longer trusted their inborn nature. They began to replace virtue with knowledge, hoping that knowledge and skills could bring order to the world. When they found that knowledge alone didn't do much, culture was introduced, mixed with breadth of learning. Learning then bred arrogance, which led to debates of whose culture was best. Obsession with learning clouds clarity. With time, people lost clarity, they got confused and deluded, and they had no inkling of how to return to the way. As a result, the world lost the way. The way was no longer part of the world, and both rapidly moved farther and farther apart. What did the sages do in the face of all this? Although they did not always retire onto the mountains and into the forests, their virtue was hidden. Although they did not conceal themselves in caves and deep valleys, their wisdom was drawn inward. Although they did not actively refuse to use their abilities and talents, their knowledge was locked away. If destiny allowed, they would exercise virtue, wisdom, knowledge, and skill. If the times were not right, then all that was left for them to do was to deepen their roots, rest in truth, keep themselves alive, and wait. How do you live in tumultuous times? First, do not decorate knowledge with ornaments. Second, do not use knowledge to make trouble or try to use it to repair virtue. Third, be true to your inborn nature and rest in vastness. Virtue has no use for petty understanding. Small mind turns you away from virtue, and petty understanding steers you from the way. In this manner you will find fulfillment. When the sages spoke of fulfillment, they did not mean having material wealth or fame and recognition. For them, fulfillment meant that their lives were so joyous and complete that nothing could make them better. Autumn floods. When the autumn floods arrived, the Lord of the River was very pleased with himself, thinking that he was the greatest body of water on earth. But when the river reached the sea, the River Lord, seeing the wide expanse of the waters, was humbled. Having seen the vast and limitless sea, he understood that it is impossible to weigh and measure everything. Time, permanence, and even space are all illusions. The wise ones know that there is no beginning and no end. Observing that which is far and that which is immediate, the sage does not consider the large to be cumbersome and the small to be minuscule. She has a clear understanding of past, present, and future, and prefers not to ponder whether time is long or short. Seeing the true nature of things, she is beyond fullness and emptiness, gain and loss. Walking the middle path, she is not interested in seeking either the high or the low. For these reasons, she does not exult in life and does not dread the coming of death. The realized ones do not harm others in their actions, nor do they display benevolence or charity. They see no reason to avoid the wealthy or to demean the porter at the gate. They do not scheme to attain wealth, but they do not refuse it when they receive it. They do not force people to help them, but at the same time they do not brag about being self-sufficient. In fact, when offered help, they happily accept it. Although their actions are different from those of the petty and the vulgar, they do not display eccentricity or aloofness. They are content to stay with the crowd, but do not despise those who rush ahead. Fame and renown do not stir them to action, and punishments do not deter them from being true to virtue. Those who follow the way win no fame. Those who possess the highest virtue win no fortune. The realized ones have nothing to gain or lose because they have no notion of accomplishment or attainment. Do not imprison your inborn nature by latching onto notions of few and many. Few and many are merely part of the natural coming and going of things. Be unbiased and humble like the earth. Soil and dirt do not grant special favors. Be expansive and broad-minded like the four directions. Directions know no bounds and limits. The way is without form and limit and without beginning and end. That which has form will always have a beginning and an end. One moment these things come into existence. Another moment they dissolve into nothingness. You can never find fulfillment in forms. Birth, growth, death, and decay are all part of the natural order of things. Hang on to any one of these, and you'll forever be confused. Understand the way, and you will have insight into the natural course of things. Know how things run their natural course, and you will be able to deal with emerging and dissolving circumstances. Know the principles of coming and going, and you will never be harmed. Embrace virtue, and you will not be harmed by fire, water, and wild animals. This has nothing to do with having magical abilities. It's about being able to intuitively distinguish danger from safety. Be content, and do not force yourself beyond your limits. In this way, you will never get yourself into situations that will injure you. If you understand that virtue is part of the way, you will not let what is unnatural to the way bury your inborn nature. True joy. Wealth, renown, and long life are what most people want today. Happiness is defined as a life of leisure, exotic food, fine clothing, beautiful sights, and pleasing sounds. Poverty, feeling useless, and an early death are what most people hate. A hard life with little rest, food without taste, clothing that is out of style, and no sights and sounds to entertain the senses are the things most people dread. People who can't get fame and fortune will go to no end to attain them, and those who have them are deathly afraid that they will lose them. What a stupid way to live. Those who are rich spend their time trying to get richer, wearing themselves out by piling up more wealth than they can ever use. What a waste of time. Those who have a reputation and a name to uphold spend their time scheming to become more famous, afraid that others will see and exaggerate their small faults. What a useless way to spend energy. If you are worrying and fretting all the time trying to get more, you'll end up with a tired body and an addled mind, even if you live a long life. What a callous way to treat yourself. True joy lies in non-action. True joy knows no happiness or sadness. It is beyond praise or blame. Right and wrong are not decided by public opinion. If you measure yourself by what others think, you will live only to please the crowd. Since you can't please everyone, you will never truly be content and happy. Heaven follows the way of non-action, letting things run their natural course. Its inaction is called purity. Earth also follows the way of non-action, letting things come naturally to their own fruition. Its inaction is called peace. Heaven and earth are not interested in making things happen, yet things happen. Mysteriously, wonderfully, things emerge, are transformed, and then dissolve. All this happens without anyone deciding what should happen and what shouldn't happen. Leaving all things to mind their own business and not getting involved in the dirty work of twisting and turning fate and destiny, is this not true joy? Attaining life. Those who understand what it means to attain life do not labor over the limits of life. Those who understand the true nature of destiny do not labor over what knowledge cannot change. If you want to nourish life energy, you must not dissipate it. At the same time, you must not be too attached to prolonging it beyond its limits. The coming of life cannot be manipulated, and its departure cannot be stopped. If you want to nourish the body, first break the attachment to worldly things. Without entanglements, you can calmly follow the course of life naturally and won't always try to make things go your way. The breaking of attachments is important to cultivating life energy, because if you are no longer worked up over gain and loss, you will not force your body to labor beyond its limits or squander your vitality trying to conquer the world. Your body will be in tune with the rise and fall of the vapors of heaven and earth. Consequently, their vapors and yours will freely exchange. When their vapors are absorbed into your life force, you will be free from illness. The realized ones can stay underwater and not drown, walk on fire and not get burned, and wander through creation without fear because they guard the true breath by resting within the limitless. Wandering freely between the beginning and the end of things, they nourish the breath, united with virtue, and join it with the source of creation. Protecting what belongs to heaven and embracing what belongs to earth, their spirit is pure and without blemish. How can fire, water, hope, or fear injure them? If the vital breath is dissipated and not replenished, life energy will be depleted. If it rises but does not fall, this will lead to irritability. If it descends but does not ascend again, this will lead to forgetfulness. And if it neither ascends nor descends, but simply hovers around the region of the heart, illness will result. Realized beings wander beyond the dust of the world, roaming freely and aimlessly. They practice the art of doing but not forcing, and caring but not bossing. In this way, they preserve vitality, life, and virtue. Don't try to develop what is created by force and unnaturalness. Let things run their own course naturally and effortlessly. Those who cultivate the way will nourish life. Those who push things stubbornly will injure life. If you don't reject heaven, don't harm earth, and don't neglect humanity, you'll be pretty close to the way. Mountain Tree. There was a huge tree standing in a mountain forest. Its trunk was gnarly, its branches were thick, and its leaves were lush. A woodcutter passing by took one look at the tree, then decided not to touch it. Jiangzi, who happened to witness this scene, asked the woodcutter why this giant tree was not harvested. The woodcutter replied, "This tree is useless. Its trunk is so ugly that nobody would want to make it into furniture. The branches are too big for firewood, and there are just too many leaves that need to be stripped." Jiangzi commented, "Because of its worthlessness and ugliness, this tree will live out the span of life it was given." If a tree is not felled because of its uselessness, how much can you live out your life without getting into trouble if you are quiet, aimless, and drifting? Climbing the way and following virtue, neither praised nor blamed, now a dragon and now a snake, never holding to one course but always changing with the circumstances, and treating things as things but not letting yourself be treated as a thing. This will allow you to live out your days in peace. It is natural for things to come together and then fall apart. That which is sharp will become blunted, those who hold high positions will fall, and the ambitious will eventually be defeated by their ambition. If you have some intelligence, you'll be the target of schemes. If you're stupid, you'll be cheated. Either way, you'll get eaten alive by plots and intrigues. Only when you follow the way and walk in virtue will you not come to harm. Animals with beautiful fur will be killed for their pelts. No matter how well they hide, they'll be caught eventually. They may stay in their lairs during the day, venturing out to hunt only at night. Yet one day they'll walk into nets and traps. It's not because these animals are not cautious or that they are unlucky. The fact is that their beautiful fur is killing them. In the same way, those who wear knowledge as an elegant garment are also in danger of being in harm's way. Strip away your elegant robe of knowledge. Rid yourself of your beautiful coat of abilities. Dwell in emptiness and clarity. Be simple. Blend within the dust and dirt of the world, and you'll never be noticed. There is a country where people are simple-minded and unsophisticated. Not knowing what it means to desire, they are not preoccupied with getting what they want and losing what they have. They know how to give things away, but don't look for anything in return. They are courteous to one another, but know nothing of etiquette, rites, and rituals. Unadorned and unrestrained, they wander aimlessly in the vast expanse. This is what it means to follow the way. When there is a birth, they rejoice. When there is a death, they prepare a fine funeral. Accepting that life and death are part of the natural way of things, they do not desire to lengthen their lives by taking herbs and minerals, nor do they shorten their lives by throwing away their life energy. If you wish to live in such a country, you should discard your name and break away from those things that strain your body and tire your spirit. Let the way be your guide and journey there. Let unconventionality be your helper. Let an unfettered mind be your vehicle. Lessen your needs, minimize your desires, don't make too many detailed plans, don't harbor too many expectations, and you'll get there. You may have to cross endless mountains and valleys and drift across wide-open oceans. Even though you gaze as far as you can, you may never see your destination. Those who come to see you off will stay behind as you move farther and farther into the distance. You may think that the journey to this hidden land is fraught with hardship, but hardship exists only for those who worry too much. Those who wander through the great silence always travel alone, effortlessly and aimlessly. When you're done with all the carving and polishing that has to be done, return to the simplicity of the uncarved block. Happily bid farewell to what goes, joyfully greet that which comes, for what comes cannot be denied, and what goes cannot be stopped. Boasting about success means you have failed. True success need not be broadcasted. Therefore, let go of success, fame, and recognition, and mingle with the common and the ordinary. The way flows far and wide in realized beings, but they are not attached to its brightness. Their virtue moves effortlessly, but they do not dwell in renown. Like bears, they wander aimlessly in the forest, shrugging off their power, wiping off their paw prints to leave no trails. Thus, they have no cause to blame others, and others have no reason to blame them. Leisurely they walk in a free and easy manner. They gave away their learning, sat in silence, and returned to simplicity. Their students no longer come seeking wisdom. Officials no longer come patronizing their talents, but their affection and friendship are greater than ever. It is best to leave the body relaxed. When feelings emerge, it is best to let them come and go. When you go along with things rather than fight them, you will not run the risk of becoming their enemy. By keeping your body relaxed, you will avoid getting fatigued. By letting your feelings come and go, you won't dissipate life energy. And when you are not at odds with the world and are not fatigued by worrying about everything, you'll find no need to bask in luxury, seek reward, or depend on things going your way. When you embrace virtue but cannot apply it, you need not be distressed. Wait for the right time, and you'll be able to serve humanity. If you're poor, unknown, and unnoticed, you should not be distressed. Hunger, thirst, cold, heat, and discomfort are all part of life and the natural turning of events. Humanity exists because of the way, and the way exists because of itself. Humanity can never cause the way to exist because humanity is limited, whereas the way is limitless. The tree with an unblemished trunk will be the first to fall and be made into beams and pillars. The well that is brimming with sweet water will be the first to run dry. And those who show off their learning and abilities to impress others, who display and wear their virtue like a colorful shirt, and who go around parading good deeds like bright lights, will be the first to fall. The sage simply plods along effortlessly. In life he is never prominent. In death he does not leave a trace. He understands his coming, embraces the changes, and accepts his going with calmness and fortitude. Tian Zifang. When a man named Tian Zifang was asked why he never praised his teacher or talked about him, he replied, "There's nothing extraordinary about my teacher. He's a human being with the heart of heaven. He follows the way, keeps true to virtue, and embraces all things. If he encounters those who do not follow the way, all he has to do is be himself, and the ignorant will become enlightened. If all he does is to be true to himself, why is this extraordinary?" Yin and yang are actually quite simple to understand. Ultimate yin is cold and stern, ultimate yang is warm and bright. The sternness and coldness of ultimate yin comes from the heart of heaven's yang. The warmth and brightness of ultimate yang comes from the heart of earth's yin. The essences of yin and yang are embedded in their opposites, so each already exists within the other. Yin and yang interact, copulate, commingle, and harmonize with each other, bringing forth all life. Birth, life, decay, and death all come to pass, but who manipulates this process? The sun shifts, the moon waxes and wanes. Who's pulling the strings? Life has its beginnings, and death has its destination. Beginning and end follow each other in an unbroken cycle. This is simply the natural way of things. When water dances and skips over stones and ledges, it is its nature, not something it does deliberately. It's the same way with the sage's relationship to virtue. Virtue is simply natural to her. She does not need to work hard at it or even cultivate it. It's as natural as the height of the sky and the depth of the earth. So what is there to cultivate? The ones who embrace the way are simple and ordinary, therefore gossipers leave them alone. Plain and unassuming, they do not arouse interest. Dull and silent, they do not invite debate and argument. While many regard life and death as great events, these things have no hold over them. Because they are not threatened by changes or attached to titles and wealth, their spirit can soar over the highest mountains and plunge into the deepest springs. Elevated, they are not arrogant. Unnoticed, they are not distressed. Their fullness fills heaven and earth. They give everything to others, yet they possess all. Knowledge journeys north. Knowledge journeyed north, ran into do nothing, say nothing, and asked for advice. How can I find the way? What path should I take? What kind of practices will I need to attain tranquility? Do nothing, say nothing was silent. He didn't answer, not because he did not want to answer, but because he simply did not know how to answer. Undaunted, Knowledge kept going. He encountered Wild and Witless and asked the same questions. Wild and Witless said, "Yes, I can give you the answers." But just as he was about to open his mouth, he promptly forgot what he was supposed to say. Failing to get any answers, Knowledge returned home and paid a visit to the Yellow Emperor, who was known to be the wisest man of his time. How can it be that these sages don't even have a clue on attaining tranquility and clarity when you and I sometimes have a vague idea of what we should do? Asked Knowledge. The Yellow Emperor replied, "Do nothing, say nothing, got it. Wild and Witless appeared to get it. You and I, however, are nowhere near being right. Those who know do not speak, and those who speak do not know. You can't talk about the way or force its virtue. However, you can cultivate and practice benevolence, kindness, and generosity. You can also talk about integrity, honesty, honor, and humility, and figure out better ways to apply them. When humanity distanced itself from the way, it also abandoned virtue. When it abandoned virtue, there was a need to promote benevolence, kindness, and generosity. When even these acts are dismissed," he continued, "what we have left are laws, protocols, and rituals. When even those are gone, we have disaster on our hands. Those who follow the way do less and less each day. Finally, they end up doing nothing and saying nothing. However, because nothing is said and nothing is done, everything is done." Knowledge said to the Yellow Emperor, "Why do you say that do nothing, say nothing was right on the mark, Wild and Witless was off, and we were downright wrong?" The Yellow Emperor replied, "Do nothing, say nothing was correct because he honestly did not know and admitted it. Wild and Witless appeared to be correct because he thought he knew, but then forgot it. We were wrong because we thought we knew." Life is the beginning of death, and death is the beginning of life. Who can understand the workings of heaven and earth? Life is simply the emergence of breath. When breath emerges, there is life. When breath stops, there is death. Life and death are a matter of the appearance and disappearance of breath. Since life and death follow each other, why be anxious about their coming and going? All things come from the source. We judge some to be beautiful and worthy and others to be ugly and useless. But in an instant, things that are beautiful can become foul, and those that are useful can become worthless. The sage knows that there is only one breath coming from one source. Therefore, he always values this oneness. Heaven and earth have great beauty, but they never talk about it. The seasons are clear about their timeliness, but they do not discuss it. The myriad things follow the principles of birth, growth, and dissolution, but they do not expound on them. Not acting, not moving, They perceive the workings of heaven and earth, join with the purity and brightness of the way, and are at one with the transformations of all things. Living or dead, square or round, hard or soft, no one knows how things got that way. There is nothing in the world that does not change. Night and day, and spring, summer, autumn, and winter follow each other naturally. The way, dark, hidden, and mysterious, seems not to exist, but is always lurking there. Rich and limitless, it possesses no form, yet its spirit pervades all things. The myriad things are guided by it, although they do not know how and why. We call it the root of all things, or the source. To stay rooted in the source, straighten up your body, clear your vision, and be in harmony with everything under heaven. Draw in your knowledge, be regal and confident in your bearing, and let the spirits guide you. Beautify your life with virtue, let the way be your home, be pure as a newborn animal, and don't try to find reasons for everything. Use simplicity to guide your life, clear your mind of impurities, and wash and purify your spirit. Let your body be still, like earth. Dissolve yourself into oblivion. Stay true to the fundamental reality and don't search for answers. Rest in the dim, dark grotto. Then you will naturally be rooted in the source. Your body is a form that the source lent you when you were born. You don't own it, just as you don't own your destiny and inborn nature. You don't even own your children or your wealth. If you own them, why are you forced to leave them behind when you die? Therefore, it's best to walk and not be concerned with where you're going. Work without making things happen and rest without thinking too much about it. The way is bright and luminous, shining out of deep darkness. Order emerges from chaos. Form appears out of the formless. The pure spirit is born of the way. All things owe their lives to the way, all come from the source. We don't know where they came from and where they will go. The way has no gate. It is an open and wide road leading to the four directions. Those who walk it will be strong in limb, keen in intellect, and wise in judgment. Unbiased and free from prejudice, they will respond to things without acceptance or repulsion. They know that it's natural for the sky to be high, the earth to be broad, and the seasons to change. Breadth of learning does not necessarily mean knowledge. A good command of knowledge does not necessarily entail wisdom. Thus the sage is not concerned with acts of increasing and decreasing. That which increases will increase without showing signs of waxing, and that which decreases will wane unannounced. The sage holds on to that which is deep and unfathomable like the sea, and that which is high and lofty like the mountains. For a brief time she is mortal, and then she will return to the source. Her life is simply the gathering of breath, and her death is a departure of breath. It is natural for trees to bear fruits, vines to climb, and flowers to spread pollen. It is also natural for human relationships to form and dissolve. The sage, encountering these things, does not go against them or cling to them. To respond to them naturally, without praising or condemning, is virtue. To embrace them in fellowship is the way. The formless is the basis of forms. Form emerges from the formless, and form returns to the formless. This is a truth that we need to arrive at without conception. Trying to reach this conclusion by debating and searching for evidence does not work. Those who pontificate and expound the facts will not reach it, and those who have reached it will find no need to argue about it. Those who look with expectation will not see it. Those who speak elegantly of it will only cloud its existence. The way cannot be seen or heard. It emerges only in stillness and silence. Join with me in quietude, harmony, leisure, and inaction, and you will never experience exhaustion. I go nowhere and arrive without knowing how far I've traveled. I come and go and never think about starting and stopping. I've been everywhere and back, but I don't know if the journey is completed. I relax and wander freely in the vastness. Knowledge enters, and I am not aware of its existence. Wisdom enters, and I don't know where it begins or ends. If you treat things as objects, you will always be limited by objectness. If you move beyond the realm of fixity and limits, you will enter the realm of the limitless. The way fills and empties the 10,000 things, but it is never filled or empty. It makes things grow and wither, but it itself is never subjected to maturation and decay. It allows roots to dig deep and branches to spread wide, but it itself does not have roots and branches. It stores and scatters, but has no idea of storage and scattering. People in ancient times changed according to changes in nature. People nowadays play around with thoughts, trying this idea and that, sometimes adopting kindness, sometimes meanness, but stay fixed in their minds despite changing conditions. This is no way to live. The sage lives with others but does not harm them. Those who don't harm others will not meet with harm themselves. We delight in having a good home and family and a decent livelihood. Loss of loved ones, home, and possessions grieves us. The sage does not deny that these feelings are aroused naturally. It's just that he does not crave one and abhor the other. Perfect speech is silence. Perfect action is non-action. Perfect understanding is not knowing you understood. To limit your understanding only to that which can be understood is shallow and ignorant indeed.